Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitter's acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
What's shaking, drinks fans? Welcome to episode 311 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of my data-driven conversation with Dr. Kevin Peterson. He's the creator of the acclaimed Detroit cocktail bar and fragrance shop combo, Castalia and Sfumato, and in the first part of this interview, we dug into his latest book project, which is using years' worth of survey data taken from his bar guests to try and crack the code for how to match any person with their perfect drink. So if you haven't already tuned into part 1, go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you right back here. But if you're already caught up, fantastic. Let's reward you with a cheeky drink. This episode's featured cocktail is Kafka Dreams. To recreate this somewhat bizarre Castalia favorite, you'll need 1 ounce of Singani, which is a Bolivian grape spirit. 1/2 ounce gentian liqueur. Kevin used either Faccia Bruto or St. George's Bruto Americano. 1/2 ounce coffee liqueur. 1/4 ounce cherry liqueur, like cherry hearing. 1/4 ounce chocolate liqueur, and 1 ml cricket tincture. Combine all ingredients in a rocks glass with a large, clear 2-inch cube. Stir for 10 seconds, garnish with an expressed orange twist, and enjoy. According to Kevin, quote, Singani is an unaged Bolivian brandy that, to be perfectly frank, is pretty harsh. It comes out of the still with lots of bright fruity notes, but also a notable burn. Completely by accident, I discovered that adding a cricket tincture to drinks containing Singani masked the harshness while leaving the fruity notes present. Rather than using the crickets to add flavor, the crickets, which have a flavor reminiscent of sunflower seeds, act as a selective flavor eraser, subtracting rather than adding. Try making this drink without the cricket tincture, take a few sips, then add the crickets and experience how the off notes get masked. End quote. Now, Kafka Dreams might seem like kind of a bizarre cocktail to feature, but it gets a lot of play toward the end of this episode, and I wanted you to have a vivid image of it in your mind and some sense of its flavor profile. That's because this drink made a very specific sort of impression on guests at Castalia, something that reveals how memory and time impact our recollection of flavors we once tasted. So definitely keep your ears open for when this libation comes back into the conversation later. Oh, and by the way, if you want to make that cricket tincture, you can pick up some dried crickets either from Amazon or at your local international food market, and all you have to do is macerate some in a mason jar with some 150-ish proof grain-neutral spirits for a week or 2, then strain everything through a coffee filter and bottle in one of those cute little eyedropper bottles for dispensing. So, now that you've realized you now have to check all your fancy cocktails for bug tincture next time you visit a fancy cocktail bar, let's turn our attention back to the interview. In part 2 of my exploration of flavor and memory with Dr. Kevin Peterson, some of the topics we discuss include what the Big 5 Personality Index, also known as OCEAN, might be able to teach us about how guests think about factors like novelty and comfort in the cocktails they enjoy. The difference between the highest rated drink on average on most Castalia menus versus the highest rated drinks for specific individuals. How people respond when asked to describe their ideal cocktail, including the aesthetics and memories they tended to focus on, and which qualities they most often left out of such a description. We also explore a somewhat half-baked theory that I propose about flavor as an attractor, which is an explanatory concept taken from complex system science that deals with nonlinear dynamics. Along the way, we muse on the complexities of serving Baijiu cocktails in the Midwest, what kinds of cocktail experiments Dr. Peterson would run if we were all guinea pigs in his flavor lab, the sublime transcendence of cauliflower and pomegranate marinated lamb, and much, much more. please head on over to sfumatofragrances.com to check out Cocktail Theory and pre-order his upcoming book, Data Driven Drinks. And I hope you enjoy the thrilling conclusion of my latest interview with Dr. Kevin Peterson. You know, you mentioned archetypes, and I think really what we're zeroing in on now is this fact that we've got human archetypes that are walking through that door, and then cocktail archetypes that we're sort of trying to match them with. And that all makes me think of the Big Five personality index. Have you ever played around with something like that? You know what I'm talking about?
Is that ocean, the openness, and
Yeah.
agreeableness? I forget what they all are, but yeah, this has come up. Some people have mentioned this before, and yeah, I think there is some crossover. I haven't collected that data, but one of the sort of non-ingredient variables that I was collecting was, how do you feel about novelty? You know, specifically novelty in the realm of spirits, which, you know, you basically just went on a riff a few minutes ago about your appreciation of novelty. And yeah, and some people want a new weird drink. Like, it would be very hard for them to list the ingredients in a drink that they want, because they want ingredients that they don't know what they are. So how can you list that? It's like, well, that's my job. I'm a bartender. I got to go out and seek out all this weird stuff and sort of have that available for you. And I remember that from my early days at Castalia, where in particular, we had a Baijiu drink on the menu at one point, which is Chinese spirit. A lot of people drink it, but not a lot of people in the Midwestern United States. And it's quite polarizing. And one of my guests was like, oh, I want this drink. And I'm like, oh, have you had Baijiu before? No. Or no, I said, do you like Baijiu? They're like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, oh, have you had it before? No, never had it before. Okay, well, yeah, it's a little polarizing. Like, what is appealing to you about this drink? Oh, the Baijiu. It's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, let's go for it then. And it, you know, after that, I started to notice that this is a pattern that, you know, some people want that novelty. And that's one of the cool things about the cocktail world, is that there's just always new little realms you can push into. How many kinds of rum are there out in the world, or just new liqueurs being introduced all the time. And on the producer side, there's always that push for novelty. And from the consumer side, there's a pull, you know, for novelty. So it keeps pushing, or, you know, it keeps driving the cocktail world into new realms. And that's very awesome. But there are also those people who just want the same old fashioned every time. And it's good to know which kind of customer you're dealing with before you start grabbing whatever weird new patchouli liqueur you just got from some foreign country or something.
Yeah, one of the things that I try to emphasize to distillers when I talk to them, and this is fresh on my mind because I was just talking to a room full of dozens and dozens of distillers, is the extent to which bartenders don't know who just sat down in front of them. And yeah, I do a lot of translation between the distilling world and the world of people who produce products that are sold in bars and carried by bars, and the world of people who actually do the work of customer service. And there's this total lack of appreciation for the fact that there's so many ways, different ways to slice and dice the preferences of a person who has just walked in the door. And bars are actually marvelously well optimized. And even just an adequate cocktail menu is marvelously well optimized, not so much to give them their perfect drink, but to get them to the place where they will be adequately happy with whatever is being passed to them, despite the crazy amount of variation that we've been describing this entire conversation. So, I mean, you know, another thing too is like, you know, if you go back to this Big Five personality index, like I think what you were describing mostly there is like openness, right? It's like the amount of the amount to which you actually gravitate towards the novelty or new experiences. But there's so many other different ways to slice and dice a person. And I'm curious that if you might be able to get some of these folks who have filled out these surveys to go and just take a Big Five personality index and report back to you.
Probably. I got lot of their email addresses. So
Just saying. I know you
I
want
might
more
have to give them
data to
more
sift through.
cocktails, but yeah.
I feel like we've got a a decent sense of the problem that you're working with. Uh, as you've been looking at all these data that you've collected, you're coming from this mechanical engineering background, which is very quantitative. You're coming from this bar ownership background, which is also very quantitative, in that you're dealing with things like pour cost and seat turnover and all that, right? So as much as everyone who walks in that door is a living flesh and blood soul who you want to make deliriously happy, they're also a number on the balance sheet. uh, have you found yourself throughout this process, and I know that you're still very much in the middle of analyzing these data, have you found yourself looking to any philosophy or any aesthetics or art as a way into these problems? You happened, I saw a social media post where you just casually dropped like the Wittgenstein Tractatus. So I'm curious if you've gone philosophical or aesthetic on any of these issues.
Yeah, a lot of what the bartending world already has is sort of anecdotal evidence of what works. And that was something I wanted to address in my first book. It's like, okay, well, this person says 2 ounces of rum and 3/4 lime and 1 ounce of simple syrup is the best. And somebody else says it's two half half, and somebody else says it's two, 3/4, 3/4. And like doing the experiment is not that hard to just like do a sweep of all the daiquiri riffs. But in whatever, more than a century of cocktail books, like nobody did it. It took me whatever, a couple afternoons and 2 or 3 bottles of rum, and that's it. And so there are these like anecdotal ideas that we've all just kind of settled on. And, I guess just running a bar is sort of an experiment in its own way. But how do you bring more sort of analysis, more precision to that process? But then the other half of that is, well, there are all these other fields that study these same ideas just in a very different light. And in some ways, a cocktail is about beauty and about, well, actually, here, let me approach it in a different way. For the drinks that people loved the most, it was rarely just the drink. It was usually, there was almost always some conceptual element to it, where either there was something intriguing in how the drink was created, there was some intriguing ingredient. It was rare, if not non-existent, that somebody just took a sip and said, yummy, top 10 drink of my life, here we go. It was always pushing them. There was always some tension was built and then released, and you can make analogies to music or visual art or all of these different art forms where you're like, okay, well, that really seems like the way a multi-course French dinner unfolds, and you've got complexity that's built up, and then you've got this intermezzo where you've got kind of this light palate cleanser, and then you go back to the complexity, or crescendos and decrescendos and musical pieces, and drawing analogies to that. I actually was a philosophy major for a couple of years before I switched to physics, so got a little bit of that in my background. I wouldn't say it's something that I necessarily called out real explicitly, but a lot of those thought patterns are present. And maybe sort of to make it more tangible, one of the things I saw was that, for one, it's very hard to get every drink right. Even when I had everybody's data, they'd answered 100 questions, I knew exactly their total flavor background, and I had all the time in the world to make them drinks. I usually could not nail like every drink that I made them was not a top 10 drink. Often at least one of the drinks I made them was a top 10 drink. But as a supplement to that, I would ask people to rate the 8 drinks, just the normal guests coming in on a normal night, rate the 8 drinks, and then rate the overall experience. What I saw was that even people that did not rate a lot of the drinks very highly still rated the overall experience very highly.
Hmm.
So it's like you don't have to get every drink right. And there's a combination of factors. Like some people knew that this drink was well made and it just wasn't for them, which is kind of the gin and tonic issue I was talking about early on. I know what this gin and tonic is supposed to taste like. I can tell this is a well-made gin and tonic. I just don't like it. For some people, it was just the amount of thought that they could tell that went into all the drinks, and they're like, yeah, like, I just think this drink sucks. But you guys worked on it really hard, and I have some appreciation for that, how much time and effort went into it. So it's like, as long as you nail at least 1 or 2 points in the experience, and then just offering that breadth of flavors, it's like we're hitting all these different points, and maybe the person's not a novelty seeker, but they still enjoy being pushed out of their flavor comfort zone from time to time. And even though they don't enjoy it, they're like, yeah, that was still a cool thing. I'm glad I did it, even though I didn't enjoy it in the moment. So yeah, that was a long and winding answer to your question about aesthetics.
Well, let me hit you with a quote here that I was able to pull up. This is taken from a book on poetic criticism. This is from a guy named Stanley Plumley, who was he was a teacher of mine, and the book is called Argument and Song. So you can see almost the tension right there, almost like science and art. And it's about these kind of archetypes that we've been circling around during this conversation. So the quote is this: archetype is the machinery through which autobiography achieves something larger than the single life, and autobiography is the means by which archetype is renewed. And I love that. And I was thinking about that because what you're describing is data that doesn't seem to want to cooperate, and yet actual lived experiences that are rather positive on the whole. Right. So it's like, it's almost like, I don't know. I served these people these drinks, they left happy. And now I can't get these data to responsibly squeeze into the patterns that I think should represent that. And to me, that's just a tension, right? And so it reminds me of this tension between archetype, which are these big buckets like the old fashioned or like the bitter boozy fan, right? There's archetypes on both sides. And then there's the individual expression. There's also individuals on each side, right? There's the individual cocktail that expresses that archetype of the bitter boozy drink. And then there's the individual person who is that very specific idiosyncratic expression of whatever archetype they are. And multiple archetypes, in fact, right? Like you can unfold multiple archetypes out of both the cocktail and the person. So really, I think the important thing and the thing that seems to carry through here is that tension. And it seems less about, ultimately less about maybe making the perfect drink and more about finding a way to navigate that tension in such a way that we pull something off. I don't know. What does that make you think of?
Yeah. One of the big findings was the highest rated drinks on average for every seasonal menu where I took data, which was about, I think, 9 menus. The highest rated drink on average was always sort of an archetype drink. There's like sweet and sour, clear spirit, mostly familiar ingredients. It's like if you just kind of had to pick an easy, like margarita-esque, gimlet, lemon drop kind of drink, that was always the one that scored the best on average. But it was almost never the one that an individual said was the favorite.
That's fascinating. I have a personal opinion that like the margarita is the most diabolically like evil drink in that it just hits every base desire that humans don't realize they have, but actually have a lot. So sorry, but that's so funny that's what the data show.
And when you get into weirder drinks, so like one of the weirdest drinks was it was riffing on old fashioned, but it was a clear spirit. It was made with aquavit and then absinthe, and it was spicy. So basically 3 very polarizing elements. And this was the most hated drink, or let me say, The most people hated this drink of any drink. But the second most people loved that drink. So a lot of drinks, as I'm collecting this data, a lot of times it's pretty grouped. Like, okay, this drink, a lot of people give this a 4, and a few people give it a 5, and a few people give it a 3. So like it's pretty clustered. This drink, it was like very spread across the entire data range. And you could almost break it down and see like, well, I like spice, but I don't like black licorice, but I do like clear spirit, and like depending on how many of those features people were into, like you could kind of predict like where they were going to fall on that rating. But then the weird thing is for the people that loved it, and especially, so I had people rate on a 1 to 5 scale, or they could give it like a heart if it was a top 10 drink of their life. The people that said it was a top 10 drink, and there were a number of them, they didn't talk about the ingredients. They didn't say, I loved spice and black licorice and clear spirit forward drinks. They would say, this was unique. This is unlike anything I've ever had before. This pushed me into new realms. Or a few people were like, I don't have words to describe this. Like it pushed them into just some, ecstatic, wordless state where they couldn't even talk about what it was they were experiencing. That drink would never make it onto a menu at Applebee's. That drink would never make it, and even like my bar, which was very weird and pushed weird things, and that was like our calling card. I remember us all sitting around and being like, is this too weird? Like we have to like serve this to people for the next several months for the seasonal menu. Like, can we look people in the eye and give them this drink? And yeah, and it turned out to be amazing for an admittedly small percentage of people. But one of the big takeaways is for all of the drinks, there really was no drink that everyone loved or everyone hated. Every drink had some kind of spread. And what that says is that like no drink is inherently good or bad. It's the matching of the drink to the person.
Right.
Whether that's through a menu, whether that's through a questionnaire process, whether that's through an algorithm, like that's where the improvement needs to happen, is the matching and not the drink making, at least at my bar.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, that's why we don't have stories where every character is basically the same and just has, they just have different names, right? The too monotone. You need sort of a landscape, you need movement, you need diversity. Like all of these things create an interesting experience. I'm going to hit you with a hot take here, and I think this might hit on some of your physics. This might hit on some of your science. I think of flavor, and especially these flavor archetypes, as an attractor. Have you spent any time thinking about attractors?
A little bit, yeah.
And to specify what I mean by that for listeners, basically an attractor is a mathematical or physical theory, right? It's a concept where you can think of almost like a black hole as a type of attractor, right? As you approach the black hole, the pull to come into the black hole is a little bit stronger, right? You can also think of a coffee table as an attractor, right? You realize that when you have your living room feng shuied in a certain way, people keep on banging their shins on the coffee table, but when you feng shui it a different way, that coffee table is no longer a shin attractor, right? So it is a very real and manipulatable thing, and it has to do with when certain bodies end up getting pulled, whether those are mathematical entities, quantities that you're measuring, using math, or literal physical shins in a living room. An attractor is something where things tend to converge. So I think of flavor archetypes almost in the same way. And the reason why I've started thinking that way, Dr. Peterson, is precisely because of the issue of everybody's palate is different, right? Because to me, that seems to solve, if instead of thinking of flavor as a thing that is like a specific activation pattern in the brain that happens in the same way in everybody's brain, well, we know everybody's different. So instead of thinking of it as the same type of pattern in people's brain, if we think of it as a type of convergence that we can get and that we can over time measure, and that people can over time formulate a resonance to and opinions and relationships with, then I think the attractor status allows us to be sufficiently mathy that we can study it, but also sufficiently in touch with reality that everybody gets to be their own person. Thoughts?
Whew, it's a lot. I guess in a general sense, one of my big questions has been, how do you map cocktail space? How do you visualize it? Which, the language of attractors, and that lends itself to some visualization too. But, what are the axes? Is it spirit? Is it degree of bitter? Is it ratio of sweet to sour? Is it novelty and complexity? Some of these things are nonlinear, like rum is not 2 times whiskey, which is half of gin. Like they're just distinctly different thingies. And so, I think pulling it into some realm where you can apply math is great, but it's not super straightforward. Some elements of flavor don't really lend themselves to like quantification in any way that I've come across.
Well, I think it actually ties back to the work that you did in cocktail theory about like defining daiquiri, right? Like you did a pretty good job of circumscribing daiquiri space and Negroni space, right? And so in that respect, I think what you did is you sort of plotted an attractor where on one side of that you were either just barely in the orbit of that thing that's pulling you into the notion of daiquirihood, and if you're smack dab in the middle, there's absolutely no question as to whether you're there. So I think weirdly, right, like you've got these averages, and I think in a space where you and I have seen and experienced these transcendent moments, we tend to maybe shove the averages to the side because we know how problematic and how sketchy that is from a mathematical standpoint. But I think actually, if you're thinking about flavor attractors, I look to the places where there's the highest amount of convergence on like what people agree is an old fashioned, or what people agree is vanilla, or what people like, you were mentioning before, like that pineapple thing of just like, oh, there's definitely no pineapple in that drink. But like, if enough people agree that there is something that maybe there's not pineapple in it, but maybe it's pineappling in their brains, right? So it's again very difficult to measure. I agree with you, but I think I look to the places of those like average convergence to kind of bear out some of those attractor qualities. Now, again, mapping those is above my pay grade as an MFA in poetry.
Nice. I don't know. I had a thought, lost it. Never mind.
That's okay. Sorry. That's okay. That was a total left turn. I'll let you marinate on that, and you can send me an unhappy email if it ends up wasting your time as you draft this book. Anything else that you want to share about this project that you're working on before we jump into a few lightning round questions?
Okay. One interesting finding. So part of the idea is, how do you match a drink with a person? Most of the time, a menu is the tool for that process. One of the questions that I asked people was, hey, read through the menu, tell me which drink you think you're going to like the most, which drink you think you're going to like the least. And people got those answers right less than half the time.
Interesting.
Which is maybe more dramatic at my bar because I tend to use weirder ingredients and whatever, a little more esoteric stuff. But, the analog there is like when a guest comes in and orders one drink a la carte, that is exactly what they're doing, is saying, what drink do I think I'm going to like the most? I'm going to order that. And turns out like more than 1 out of 2 people are not getting the drink that they would like the most. For some percentage of people, the drink they thought they were going to like the least, they wound up liking the most. So the beauty of the tasting menu is you drink all of them, whether you like them or not. But then you wind up drinking things that you wouldn't have ordered because not too many people come in and order 8 drinks just for alcohol quantity as much as anything. But yeah, if you've had 6 bad ones, you're like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and not have these last two on the menu because I'm pretty sure this place is not good.
Well, I think that validates certainly both the need for the project, right? Like the fact that less than half of people are actually getting this right means that work should be done on this, and also the method that you've used with this tasting menu seems to be borne out by this as well. So that is a very very interesting fact. It just occurred to me that we should also probably give people a way that they can follow your progress on this project. So maybe before we jump into the lightning, how do people follow along and keep tabs on what you're working on?
Yeah, that is a great question. My Instagram is at Dr. Kevin Peterson. That is where I put my cocktail experiments and sort of progress on the project. I had a Kickstarter to publish the book that was fully funded, and it is now available for pre-sale on my website, sfumatofragrances.com. So I still sell the fragrances that I was selling when I had the bar online, and that is SFUMATO fragrances, sfumatofragrances.com. Not only are the scents available for sale, but my first book and pre-sales of my second book as well.
Amazing. Well, we will link to all those. Now, a few quick lightning round questions. So
Sure.
speaking of the transcendence idea that you seem fond of, have you ever had a bite or a sip of something that has brought you to tears? And those could be tears of pleasure or potentially tears of pain.
Yeah. On my 5-year wedding anniversary, my wife and I went to a tasting menu place called Albina here in Detroit. And so very similar setup to the cocktail tasting menu. We were getting all these little bites. And I guess harkening back to your previous comments, I don't really even know what spices were on this. Like, it was cauliflower. I know that much. But something about the depth and complexity of this bite, it was like I felt it in different parts of my head and body than I had ever felt flavor before. And it blew my mind. It was like the 7th bite out of 12 mini courses. And, you're just trying to keep up with like all the stuff that's coming. And then this bite hits and you're just like, whoa, okay, hold on, guys. Like, the room is spinning. I gotta like grab the whatever countertop just to like make sure I don't fall out of this stool here for a second. And yeah, I remember exactly how it made me feel. And not only like emotion, but like a physical feeling. It's like something happened like in other deeper parts of my body where flavor doesn't normally exist. And thinking back to some of these comments, like if somebody had just sort of given me that bite randomly as a one-off thing, would it have had the same experience? Or was it like being with my wife and the dinner and the ceremony and the sort of like all the other bites were also good? So was it like the crescendo that the chef had built leading up to that? Probably.
Yeah,
But
you gotta have your suspicions, right? Like the element of surprise kind of snuck up on you there. I have one in my back pocket, and I've never told it on the podcast. I think this is a perfect time. You'll appreciate this. I was at a place in Philadelphia called Zahav, and it was actually for a wedding rehearsal dinner. And in between the time when this rehearsal dinner was booked and scheduled and when it actually took place, they won some sort of James Beard Award. So very, and it was at its peak of whatever it was doing food wise. And so we went there, and I had heard amazing things about their lamb, and I like me some lamb. So I was excited to try it. So we're at the table, we're doing the meze, they're pumping bread and hummus into us so that we're not too expensive on the other front, right? So we're having a good time eating the pre, the meze and having a couple of drinks. And then I read the description of the lamb, and I'm like, it's got like pomegranate molasses in it. And I'm like, God, like why do you have to do that to a perfectly good piece of lamb? I'm sure it's perfectly fine. Why do you got to soak it in sugar and pink? And like, are we serious right now? And so I was like, all right. I just wrote it off. And so like whenever it came my way, I was involved in a conversation and like casually took a bite and just almost blacked out for a second because it was just the most perfect bite that had ever hit my palate. It completely subverted all my grouchy expectations of what it was going to be based on the description, and it came right when I was not expecting it. And I like people were like, "What's wrong? Like, are you choking? Are you like, did somebody just say
People
something?"
start doing the Heimlich.
No,
No.
they're like, "Wow!" They're like, "Why are you? Is he crying? Like, what's happening right now?" And I was just like, I think I might have also been the first person to taste it. And I was like, no, like I just needed a moment to compose myself. So I too have been there. It's why I have this question on the lightning round. And I deeply, deeply sympathize with what you went through.
Well, just to build on that briefly, there was a category of comment that kept coming up, which was, I don't normally like X. This drink has X, and I love this drink. I don't normally like gin cocktails, but this gin cocktail is fantastic. And yeah, it's almost like it's a dangerous game to put something in there that somebody doesn't like. But when you do pull it off, there are also plenty of comments saying, I don't like gin. This cocktail is gin and I hate it. But like when it works, it's like it gives you that extra boost to be like, oh, pomegranate molasses, like yuck. And then when I do get it right, you're like, oh, well, now we're onto something.
Yeah, and I think like that's almost like that's almost sort of what breaks that attractor thinking, right? And maybe that's the brain's desire for plasticity, right? Because flavor attractors of any sort aren't about divergence; they're about convergence, right? And so when you have these divergent situations in a flavor sense or otherwise, it either messes with the data so you're angry about it, or it unseats a lot of assumptions and things that you were previously able to just like not consciously process, right? This is all background stuff and be like, all right, we'll just assume all this stuff, and suddenly all that's on its head. But I think there's something about the human brain that simultaneously, like it's partially it's that novelty craving thing, but I think more generally it's just that plasticity, right? It's almost psychedelic in nature when it happens, right? You were describing some extra sensory things going on, and it's like there's that. So I think maybe there's, along with the attractor talk, there might also be a role that plasticity has to play.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. Next up, what are one or two of your proudest menu creations from Castalia? Obviously, you mentioned that we're in this kind of like fairly emotional and sort of tender afterglow. And so I think this would be a good opportunity for you to list a couple of these things by name, and maybe give us the name of the aquavit one and pick another one.
Yeah. The aquavit one was called Reversing Day and Night. One of my bartenders, Erica Castle, actually one of my co-owners, came up with that one. She would almost always have like one of the most popular drinks and one of the least popular drinks on the menu. And it's like, okay, I don't know if you're doing this on purpose, but data keeps showing that you are splitting the difference. So one of the most remembered cocktails and one of the most asked about cocktails was called the Kafka Dreams. And it involved a cricket tincture. And, I was kind of on this kick where I was reading about bugs as food, and bugs are the future of food and this protein source. And I was like, well, can we put bugs into drinks? And, this was like in the first year or two of Castalia, it was on the menu and people kept asking for it. And I would often ask people, like, do you remember what's in it? Do you remember anything about it? It was the cricket one. Couldn't remember what kind of glass, what kind of ice, what color, any ingredient in it other than the cricket. And that's just kind of like the nature of the memory, is like that was such a novel element that literally everything else dropped away. And then when I would serve it to people, they would be, oh, it tastes exactly, like once they had the actual input in front of them, they could remember that that was the flavor. But yeah, the memory only held on to, or, the mind only held on to that one fraction of the memory, which was kind of the novel piece.
It's so weird trying to do all this with the brain because we understand so little about it. It is crazy, and I think that's precisely why it's interesting to hear all these little examples that you give, because it's like, yeah, we're pretty smart, but the brain is always going to win at the end of the day. That is something. All right, I'll give you your suspension of reality question here. So let's set aside all the normal constraints, laws of physics, customer. We don't care if nobody needs to like this, right? You're not trying to please anybody. You have all the money in the world, right? You're Bezos right now. You can do whatever you want. What is a cocktail experiment or a cocktail ingredient or process that you would inflict on the masses if there were literally no rules?
Well, let's see. One process I've been very intrigued by that we've touched on a little bit is like, how do people acquire a taste? You can't quite remember if you like chartreuse or not the first sip. There are a lot of things I remember absolutely not liking my first sip of. My first sip of espresso. I remember just like choking down my first beer, at some college party. My first Negroni, I was like, seriously? And this was a while ago. I paid $8 or $9 for this. That dates the memory right there.
Yep.
But I distinctly remember not enjoying it, and it's one of my favorite cocktails now. And I guess what I'd love to study is like, do you just have to keep subjecting somebody to this flavor, and eventually they enjoy it? Is it the right context? I guess one thing that I need to do is like take those people that said, I normally don't like gin cocktails, but I like this. I want to follow up with them and be like, have you gone down a gin rabbit hole? Like, where are you at with gin now? Was it just a one-off thing one time when you were at my bar? Or is it now like a new angle of your life that we opened up? And it's maybe not, we don't need to suspend the laws of physics, but we need to suspend the laws of business, because this would require me like giving people a lot of stuff they don't like. Keep coming back in, keep drinking that thing you don't like. And then when you start to like it, then we're done here.
I feel like maybe we just get you connected with the good folks at Malort, and we run the Malort study. Like what degree of Stockholm syndrome needs to exist in order for you to start liking Malort?
That is a great suggestion.
There we go.
Does anybody like it, or is it just like, it's like, do you like the flavor, or do you just like the idea of it?
Well,
I don't know. Maybe it's.
I mean, we've gone even further now. I don't know. Have you ever heard of Evil Malort?
I don't know if I have.
It's
is this where you try to make it even worse?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. It's precisely. It's the in-house Malort in extra infusion. And this is something I've been meaning to do an episode on. I don't think it's reached the velocity that it's a national trend, but there's definitely enough people playing around. There's certainly enough degenerates playing around with it where it's a thing that bears
people,
investigation.
if you want to call them that.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Kevin Peterson, as always, a delight to speak with you. I am very excited to be one of the lucky members of your Kickstarter supporters. So I'm very excited for this book when it does come out, and I hope that you're in a position to do a tour. Maybe we can work together to do some events together here in the Mid-Atlantic, where you can, get some boots on the ground and get some people excited about the book and the process.
Yeah, would love that.
I just appreciate you being a guest. And one more time, best Instagram for you.
Dr. Kevin Peterson, DrKevinPeterson.
All right. Well, thank you for your quantitative and organoleptic services as always. And thanks for being my guest here on the Modern Bar Cart podcast.
Hey, love it. Thanks for having me.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's a couple things you can do to help the show. One would be to rate and review this program anywhere you enjoy listening to podcasts, especially on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. The more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it will be for other like-minded flavor nerds to enjoy the content that I produce. You can also follow the Modern Bar Cart YouTube channel where I post video clips from the podcast and beyond, and you can join our growing Discord community, which is where our listeners submit questions for upcoming guests and chat about all kinds of fun spirits and cocktail shenanigans. It's also where I share fun perks and discounts that are too exclusive to blast out on the airwaves. To join our community Discord server or get in touch with me for any other reason, all you need to do is drop me a line by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and boozy adventures are just beginning. So remember, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and sound design by Samantha Reed, cocktail insights courtesy of Dr. Kevin Peterson, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Direct Fire Studios production, copyright 2026.